Hello, good evening, and welcome to Sunday Night Breakdown. Daniel Routledge and Dave Forrester with you for the final time for season 5 of SMB, Dave. It's been a bit of a roller coaster year, hasn't it, with everything that's gone on? I've had a couple of rants. The bucket was almost empty. Then on the court, we've had an all-time competitive season. 4 different winners, British team in European final. Some pretty good moments along the way. I'm sure we'll get into the detail in a bit, Dave, but initial reflections on the season.
Appropriate name for the podcast. Sunday night I was pretty broken down. Um, no, it's been pretty good. I mean, the two of us are the people who've watched the most of this stuff,
Mm,
probably even more so than the coaches who will be concentrating on the team that play next, as opposed to watching all of them. So I think we're in a relatively decent position to comment.
mm,
There's been a lot of decent, in fact, solid basketball. There's only 9 teams. All the games have been competitive. Nobody's been embarrassed, if I can put it that way.
mm.
Basically, teams that have made, organizations that have made mistakes have paid for those mistakes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, and so there's a standard there's a level that you have to get to for success, and generally the organizations that make the least mistakes have the most success.
Yeah, yeah.
Are available to that. And that comes in a number of different ways. It comes with recruitment, it comes with coaching and actually recruiting of coaches. It comes with off-court stuff. It comes with discipline, um, and just how you. It's not just a matter of signing checks anymore.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
obviously last year, 2 years ago, it wasn't a matter of signing checks. London were able to sign far greater checks than everybody else, which took a lot of jeopardy away from what happened. Um,
And
there's
that was the thing, really, wasn't it? It was the jeopardy. It was the sort of up and down nature. Teams came to the fore and fell away at various different points, and that's
Yeah,
the
and without compromising standards.
mm, mm,
Obviously there's no Euro Cup level team in the league. There's no London Lions in the league, but I think it's fair to say that I think the rest of the league kind of leveled up.
mm, mm,
From where it been. It was sorry, we're a good basketball team, and
mm.
multiple times in this year, and they finished eighth.
Yeah.
Caledonia were a solid basketball team at the end, but they made too many mistakes in the beginning with
Mm,
their organization, with their decision making. Um, Yeah, and Newcastle 14-18 yet got to the NBL Cup final and beat teams from 7 different countries on the way.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's so firstly, if you want to look at me and post things under our podcast and put posts on there denigrating the standard, then you can do one
Mm,
basically because I'm not having that. Um, been some very, very good teams that playing the right way. Off the court, yeah, well, we've talked about it a lot. I think
mm,
we have to celebrate getting through a Eurobasket for the men. This is
yeah.
primarily a men's basketball podcast. So, I'm not ignoring the women, but, getting through a Eurobasket and, winning that game in Holland in a really difficult environment, I thought was really, really impressive and really important. And fingers crossed we can get a decent unit out in the summer and actually win a few games and earn a bit more respect that way. Um, But yeah, overall, for watching all the games,
Mm,
for good and bad, it's nice to be in a position to have an opinion on all of it.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And have an informed opinion as opposed to the normal clickbait nonsense. My opinion on it is that nothing's as bad as it seems, and certainly nothing's as bad as it's ever suggested to be.
Mm,
But if you had to build, you had to have a motif for the season. If someone was basically drawing up a logo of the season, it would have somebody's foot being pointed at by a gun.
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because the
There's
self-imposed
been some
mistake
missteps along the way, I think it's fair to
missteps
say.
along the way, and the test will be to a certain degree with understandable.
Mm,
To a certain degree, putting together a league with out of a failed attempt to dig into some money from some American hedge fund people of dubious repute. who did what we all thought they were going to do eventually and basically bust the league. To put a new league together in 8 weeks is pretty impressive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
test now, though, is, firstly, can the loose confederation of warring tribes, that is always the ownership,
Mm,
and they pull together again, because obviously there's a lot of stuff gone on this year in relation just even between the clubs, and if so, can they sort out the stuff that I've been banging on about and you've been banging on about the governance and
yeah,
the
yeah,
regulation
yeah, yeah.
and the product? Can they please just stop worrying about everything else and just make it into the best product it could be on a standardized basis?
Just jumping off on a tangent on that because I
Yeah,
got sent the. I don't know if you've seen it. The Basketball Fans Association have listed out 100 questions or something like
I
that.
haven't actually, no,
Yeah,
but
it's worth it. It's worth it. I've just while I was waiting for you, just
what percentage are we shooting
skimmed
then?
skimmed through it, and there's a lot of detail in there, and it will be interesting to see because it's obviously aimed at three different organizations as
Yes.
to which of them, if any, reply and to what level they reply at. It's interesting.
It's tough. I mean, fan engagement is tough because fans see 2%. Fan empowerment is tough because fans see 2% of what goes on.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, in fact, even I've got about as much access as anybody, given the amount of time spent in US. Well, we only probably see 10%. We only
Yeah,
know
yeah,
about 10%
yeah, yeah,
because,
yeah. That's
to be
true.
frank, life's too short.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we're
I
too
mean,
busy
like,
watching the games to get involved in
exactly,
all of
life is
that,
too.
Dave.
And I am, I am, I tire of it
Mm.
to a certain
And
degree.
there is that element of we don't need to see the man playing the organ behind the curtain, sort of
Absolutely,
thing.
yeah.
We
Except
don't
like
need
seven seven
all.
seven when you find out he's the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But we need to be sure that there is a man there playing the curtain, and we know what tune he's playing and why, sort of thing. So
Yeah, absolutely.
but
And I mean, so that's everything kind of on the SLP side, the self-inflicted mistakes, changing the rules halfway through the season, and not being able to get through the fact that you can't replace a player after February the 28th,
mm,
which is becoming more and more anachronistic every year.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it just is. Um, and then because half the season basically, and
Well, it would
something
be
else.
less of an issue if you didn't shove all your games to the back end of the
It
season,
might be,
because
yeah,
if
but
if you
if you
played the
find
same amount of games
if your
every week,
final's been played on May the 17th, still kind of 2.5 months,
yeah, yeah.
it's unnecessarily restrictive and it can impact the product you get at the end of the year.
Mm,
Um, Changing the rules mid-season, obviously the stuff with the referees was just a nonsense,
mm,
um, and utterly self-inflicted. And was the first time I began to doubt, well, hang on, have we got the nous here to actually keep this thing going?
mm,
Because it was so bizarre and so unnecessary. But outside of that, the biggest elephant in the room, and part of the reason for the stress and the strain and the within and some of the self-induced mistakes that the personnel behind the scenes at the SLB have made is undoubtedly the pressure they've been put under
yeah,
by
yeah.
by what's gone on through the governing body, which is, in my view, abandoned its mandate
Mm,
to look after the sport in this country. Has to a degree far greater than ever before tried to carve out its own niche at the expense of
yeah,
others.
yeah, yeah.
And just at the time when it was necessary and appropriate, for the détente that Kia and Ursula have shown this morning
Mm,
to kind of fit together and bring all bodies together and carve out something that was workable for everybody. Instead, they went Putin into Ukraine. They just went nuclear,
yeah.
tanks on the ground.
I tell you what, because I do want to pick up on that. Let's go through the game, and then
Okay.
we'll come back to because that's kind of looking forward
Yeah,
to the
fair enough.
future and beyond. So let's do the game first, and we'll come back to that bit.
Hang on a second. I think we've just done the game there, Dan. Let's move on.
Let's start with a game that doesn't cause you too much pain, Dave. Well, let's go with the women's game
I
first.
didn't watch
Oakland.
much of it, I'm afraid, so you're going to have to talk me
I'm
through
just going to
most of
run
it.
through it just because
Yeah,
it deserves that at least.
yeah, cool.
Oakland's Wolves 73, Sheffield Hatters 83. Wolves scored the first 8 points of the game, led by as many as 13, but were racking up fouls along the way. And then
Yeah,
last 3 minutes of the second half, Sheffield with 12 unanswered points to tie the score, second quarter even, tied the scores at 32. And then they were just relentlessly getting to the free throw line uh, to particularly Destiny Walker, and then Georgia Gale, who'd sat on the bench for most of the first half in foul trouble herself, came in and hit some Caitlin Clark threes,
yeah.
ridiculous shots, broke the backs of Oakland's, and Sheffield restored to their rightful place at the top of women's
Yeah,
basketball.
were Oakland's down a couple of players, or did they have some injuries, or did they have everybody out?
Fotu was out injured. She got injured in the cup final, but they
Yeah.
just had ridiculous foul trouble all the way through the game.
Well, I mean, I watched Sheffield in the semi-final against Newcastle. I watched Sheffield a few times this year, and they really impressed me.
Mm.
They moved the ball really quickly. They were athletic. Georgia Gale looked connected and was kind of the leader of the team, but they had some players in Harrison and Destiny. What's her name that you told me
Walker,
about?
yeah,
Walker, and even the Aussie shooter. Who,
Gandini.
yeah, Gandini here. Um, and just the way that I thought that they moved the ball and the speed and the pace that they played at was really impressive.
Mm.
So and obviously I'm a little bit, I mean, most of the women's basketball I consumed was when I hadn't had enough on the Saturday night watching a bit of the Eagles on YouTube. And actually, so obviously I saw the Eagles kind of beat Oakland. So I probably got a downside on Oakland's a little bit more than I have on Sheffield, who basically handled Newcastle 5 times. Um, but I thought they were really, I thought Oakland's were very athletic and aggressive, but I thought Sheffield played some really nice basketball every time I saw them play. And it doesn't surprise me, that they were able to do that on the big stage because I think that they didn't win the earlier one, did they?
No, no, they lost all three games to Oakland's this year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just think they were due. I just thought the way they played and the way they put Newcastle away last week, I was kind of the view that it was going to take a pretty good team to beat them.
yeah. I think Oakland's probably uh, they started the season well and probably tailed a bit
Yeah,
towards the end, and whether that's and look, they're going to say we got absolutely hammered by the referees because Sheffield were
right.
34 or 44 from the free throw line. So they've got, and obviously McRae fouled out. She was sat on the bench for a long time. Ashby was on the bench for a long. They were all over the place in terms
And,
of foul outs, and I'm up by the camera, so it's really hard to tell uh, uh, too much. It didn't look too bad to me,
hmm.
but I'm a long way away from it.
Yeah, well, I just, mental discipline is the biggest thing
Yeah,
in finals.
they never
Absolutely.
seem to adjust to it. Was
No, no,
my
mental
thing. And
discipline is the biggest
at
thing in
some
finals.
point,
You,
you've got to
you can't
do
impact the
something
game if
different.
you're on the bench.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, but no, I only caught bits of the fourth quarter, to be honest. And
So Ashby with 23, De Silva 16, McRae 13, Gale and Walker both had 19, Singleton 14 and 10. As I say,
yeah, Singleton,
34
that's the other
points.
girl I was thinking about, Singleton.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So let's move to the men's final. Leicester Riders 105, Newcastle Eagles 74. People kept asking me who I thought would win, and the night before and on the day, I said I wasn't sure, but I thought that Leicester would win comfortably or Newcastle would win
close.
close. And
Yeah.
when Leicester started making shots in the first quarter, and Hunter, you could see, was ready for the occasion. They were 17-9 up in 6 minutes. I felt like it was going to be Leicester's afternoon
Yeah, well,
right from
when
the
your
beginning.
assessment is absolutely spot on, Newcastle to win the game, it had to be an ugly game.
Mm,
They couldn't play with the synergy of Leicester or the athleticism of Leicester because they didn't have the bodies and they didn't, ultimately they were playing seven guys and one of those guys has hardly played all season.
mm,
So it had to be scrappy. And unfortunately, there's a few things about it. I think it was, and if you're looking at the bigger picture, the macro picture, it was one game too far, but that's an easy thing to say. Um, I thought that I understood why Newcastle started the lineup that they did. That was the lineup they started against London. But playing against London, playing against Leicester are two totally different things. And ultimately, Will Neighbour was like minus 24 in 9 minutes in this game.
Mm.
Everybody else is minus 24, but they're playing 30 minutes.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
so
yeah.
so that had a massive impact because I don't think he did anything wrong in particular, but the integrity they had their defense had no integrity in this game. And what I mean by that is you never worked out what they were trying to take away,
Mm.
you know. And when Hunter and Abercrombie got catch and shoot threes in the first 5 minutes,
Yeah,
I had the same feeling.
yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, if Thompson scored and said that's fine, but and the difficulty was because Newcastle, I think, knew that they had a hole in the middle defensively. A lot of the other guys, just almost without thinking about it, would edge off a little bit.
Mm.
There was one in the third corner where Okoro just helped a little bit too much from the corner, and Hunter threw the ball, and Johnson's got a wide open three.
Yeah.
Why did he help from the corner? Because he saw the mismatch in the middle, so they're a
Mm.
little bit too quick for that. And so it ended up that they didn't really defend anything that
Mm.
made any sense. The other thing where the personnel I thought really hurt them was that they need Ward Hibbett is one of the defensive players. He's one of the defensive players here, defensive team of the
Mm.
year.
Mm.
He had no defensive impact in this game because they couldn't get him on the ball.
Mm.
They needed him on Hunter. The impact that he's had on Hunter in the games he played has been quite substantial because he's long enough to impact him and physical enough just to be enough of a pest. That's how he got his props as defensive player of the year. But if you do that, then you leave, Okoro or Pulliam to guard Zach Jackson.
Mm.
Well, you don't want either of those guys, being bullied down low and getting into foul trouble that way.
Yeah.
So that means that you're left with Ward Hibbett, guarding the wing, and he was ready to play what he did, but he didn't have the impact that you have on the ball because Rowe got it absolutely right. I mean, the MVP in the game was Hunter.
Mm.
Because Hunter set the tone for everything.
Yeah.
Hunter was comfortable, and the moment he was comfortable, that it wasn't even what the 17-9. It was when I saw he was comfortable,
Mm.
I knew that Leicester were going to win the game
Yeah.
because you just have to. And why players get comfortable? Players can be comfortable when the scores are tied. If they're tied 20-20 after
Yeah.
7 minutes,
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
be uncomfortable if the scores are tied 10-10
Yeah. Yeah.
after
Yeah. Yeah.
7 minutes. The scores are the same, but they haven't found the rhythm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they get uncomfortable, and then the environment gets into your head, and then the pressure comes
In
on.
some ways, that play at the end of the first quarter made me think he was going to win MVP.
Well,
Where
yeah,
he
it was
came
that,
down,
yeah,
hit a three, but it was his reaction to it rather than the fact
yeah.
that he made it. It was like, this is my game.
But you know what I'm going to say about that, don't you?
Mm. Why are you letting him go left?
Well, that, but why it was on a screen. Why is Will Neighbour on the foul line with 2 seconds to go?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You got to be up on that screen. You got to make him make a play, and he made a great shot. I get that,
Mm.
but again, the reason Will Neighbour's on the foul line is because Will Neighbour's not the quickest defender, so he's trying to protect himself,
Yeah.
right? This is what I'm talking about. I've talked for probably bored people rigid. Talking about the difference in Newcastle's defense with Defoe and without Defoe,
Mm.
and it absolutely stood out a mile in this game because even when they could get a stop, they couldn't then get a rebound,
Mm.
and and Leicester. So I think it was optimistic putting out that lineup with Long and Neighbour in against the best starting five in the league.
Mm.
And I think they paid for it, and they specifically paid for it at the beginning. I was really surprised that the same lineup came out at the beginning of the third quarter.
Well, I've got here, they just about hung on to Leicester's coattails in the first half. Couldn't get a stop, so they'd given up 53 points at halftime, but they were only down 11. And then Leicester came out, hit three threes. Abercrombie was fouled on another one, went 2 for 3 from the line. And in 3 minutes in the second half, it's the leads to 21, and that's the ball game.
Yeah, I was surprised that Mark didn't change his line at the beginning of the third quarter. I mean, Christian James was the one guy who was really, really balling, if I can put it that way. He was posting up, he was playing with a bit of energy. And I thought by the time he got back in the game, even 3 minutes in the game was done.
Mm.
So I think to a certain degree they're a little bit spooked by Thompson's size, and they
Mm.
wanted some size to put next to him. But the difference between London, who play a static kind of slower kind of game,
Mm.
and Leicester, who play a lot more dynamically, and and a lot more offensively, aggressively, and kind of old style BBL way. So London was more of a European team the way they played. Um, makes the athleticism far more important. So I thought what worked against London didn't work against Leicester for that reason. Now I'm talking about Newcastle a lot because, as everybody knows, I'm always the person who talks about the loser as opposed to the
Yeah,
winner.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because it's always what could they have done differently. But Leicester were what they are. I mean, they were the best version of themselves. That's what you would say about
yeah,
Leicester.
yeah, definitely.
They made the plays they needed to make. They didn't get too high or too low, apart from Charlton having a silly
Yeah,
argument
yeah, yeah,
and being told, I think, on the bench to do various things,
yeah, yeah.
and just shut
But
up.
in some ways, that is the best version of him as well, isn't it? Is
It is,
you get
it
the good
is,
and the
but
bad, you get the flexes, you get the
no, it wasn't so
plays,
much
and
the
you get the
flexes.
dumbass
It's a
technical.
stupid. Yeah, it's you know what, Rob. You're up 25 in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, yeah,
And you're yelling obscenities at somebody on the bench. It's like,
yeah,
do you really want to get yourself thrown out of this game and not get a
yeah,
medal?
yeah,
In
yeah.
front of everybody. But that encapsulates what they've been. So you can't. I mean, to a
Mm,
certain degree, they stay true to their identity the whole game.
mm,
But no, for me, the game. I mean, the game was a situation when Newcastle never took anything away.
mm,
And I think part of that was, as I say, they really had very few cards to shuffle,
mm,
if you're honest. Um, and they were never going to score, unfortunately, without Aaron Aikens as kind of the extra scorer. And with, I would still guess, and I'm guessing probably a 70% of Coro,
mm,
because, he came out of the game twice in the fourth quarter against London last week,
mm,
which it doesn't happen if he's right. They were never going to score me, so it had to be kind of ugly. But they're a tough team to win ugly against because their offense is really, really good.
mm,
Leicester's offense it has been exemplary all season. It's really a typical Paternoster team. Elite
mm,
offense, stable defense. You know, and those two things, together with a kind of a sprinkling of um, BBLness, which is basically attacking and transition and getting cheap points as well,
mm,
and a no dickheads rule,
mm,
basically, which
mm.
is one of the things that they didn't have last year. They carried them through, and for their body of work over the season, they entirely deserve it. They deserve one. And
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
say that
yeah,
London
yeah,
deserve one, and I would say Newcastle deserve one for what they did in Europe, and I would say that Sheffield deserve one for what they went through in the middle of the season when they were like the best team and they won
yeah,
12 or 13 straight.
yeah, yeah,
So, it is a bit democratic, and this is why we
yeah,
like the
yeah,
trophies and not the three trophies in the lunatic All-Star game,
yeah,
which has resurfaced yet again. Because
yeah,
ultimately, you do have the opportunity to get rewards, but you have to earn it.
yeah,
And I would suggest that each and every team that's won something has in their own way earned it.
yeah. I would
And you
agree.
can you can argue till your cows come home as to which one is more important or which one gives
Doesn't matter,
you.
does it?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Ultimately, that team, those Leicester guys went for 9 months. They played
yeah,
with basically 8 players the whole season.
yeah,
The advantage of signing rookies is that they're more likely to stay healthy.
mm,
So it's not just the look that they stay healthy. If you get younger players,
mm,
logically, outside of freak accidents,
mm,
they're more likely to stay healthy game to game. And they've developed a unity and a cohesion which nobody else in the league had.
mm,
The only thing that we didn't know was whether they had the chops to do it under pressure.
yeah,
And
yeah,
to be honest, Newcastle didn't put them under enough pressure
yeah,
defensively
yeah, yeah,
for us to attack the only flaw that you could really say they had. Because once they got into a rhythm, the game was done. And I'm not going to pick out any of the Leicester guys because I think they are a unit.
mm,
Hunter was the guy who made them tick, and Newcastle failed to impact him. Um, but all the rest of them, Johnson, Wright, Abercrombie, minimum of fuss guys,
mm,
but get the job done. Jackson, minimum of fuss, gets the job done. You know, um, and they needed Hunter and Thompson to take them over the top,
mm,
and in particular Hunter.
mm.
So yeah, good job by them. Newcastle tough, just
Yeah.
tough. Just one game too far.
Hunter was the MVP, 5 of 6 from three, 7 of 10 shooting overall, 23 points. Jackson, 23 points, 8 rebounds. Abercrombie, 7 of 9 shooting for 18 points and 8 rebounds. Leicester were 51% from the floor. They were 9 of 18 from three.
Here's my thing, right, Dan, and what I'm talking about. Um, Nduku played like 8 minutes in the first half.
Yeah, yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
he
Yeah.
shot the ball. He didn't shoot the ball. He was fouled once on a drive.
Mm,
That's the only time he shot the ball. Okay. And he made two foul shots. Fine. Okay. If I'm Newcastle, there's no way in the world he's playing 8 minutes and shooting the ball once.
yeah,
Right. I'm helping. I'm making the young kid beat us. And if the young kid beats us and
yeah,
he shoots more shots than Abercrombie and Wright and Thompson and Hunter, I'll live.
yeah,
Right. But I don't think they really. I think they were two in their own heads, and because they were just too. Mark was just too short of options. Basically, particularly when you get into foul trouble in the first half as well. You got
yeah,
two fouls
yeah.
here, two fouls there. You've only got five guys. You only got seven guys you can play in the first place. Um, that they weren't able to strategize in any
Mm,
way, which is what they've managed to do in bigger games this year. And if you're getting beaten on the boards, and the boards were massive as well, particularly on the offensive glass, it's very difficult to strategize because
mm,
Leicester are very good on the offensive glass. Not just because Thompson rebounds the ball, but he makes good decisions out of it.
mm. Yeah, yeah,
So you get kick outs. You don't just get I've got an offensive rebound, therefore I've got a freedom to shoot,
yeah,
which some
yeah,
players get,
yeah, yeah.
He kicks the ball out and that then they rotate it again and then they get another open look. So they're really selfless offensive team. And I thought that, yeah, they're really, really good. I have to say I'm pretty happy it wasn't a close game because, I was a bit head in hands after the first 2 minutes when the ref blew the first two calls of the game. You didn't see it, I don't think, but Thompson on his first layup travelled quite gratuitously. He did a little spin under the basket and then did a hop step left and right, and the corner was signalling it, and the ref didn't spot it. And then on the second, I think the second or the third play of the game, Pulliam goes to the basket. He's fouled by Hunter, having taken two steps and being right under the basket, and the ball's given to him on the sideline, which I wasn't overly impressed with, I'll be honest. Then Abercrombie got a second foul, which appeared to be a phantom foul. There was a non-call on the goaltend that you mentioned, which set Shelton off because it
Yeah,
set
yeah,
James off.
yeah, yeah.
And I was surprised. I was a little bit surprised that we had three refs, none of whom had done the second day last week.
Mm,
And the second day last week should be the biggest games, so you should be, filtering your refs that way. But instead, we had three who hadn't done them. So no, but it didn't matter because it wasn't close.
mm. Pulliam
Got to comment on
20.
the refs, haven't I?
Yeah.
Because if I don't, everybody think I'm going to stop.
Pulliam 22, 10 of 17 shooting, long 12, James 12, 42% from the floor, Newcastle and 5 of 23. It's
Yeah, but I
the
think it was the rebounding and the three-point shooting. Cole Long had a couple of threes in the first half, which were open, which, good shots. He couldn't knock them down. Seneca Knight had a couple as well,
mm,
and they had to
well,
try and
5 of 23
5
versus
of
9 of
23.
18 is
But
a big
yeah, I mean,
difference.
some of them are in the fourth quarter when the game is dead, and they're not. It doesn't really matter. But when the game mattered, they did have some open looks. Their offense wasn't actually that bad, but they had to stay close enough to try and find some defensive rhythm. And as I say, I thought the lineup they ran out of the third quarter probably wasn't right. I wouldn't have had to start with Christian James in the third quarter. But he's wearing down as well. He's in foul trouble as well. So there's not many easy decisions to make.
It was the second biggest win in a playoff final. Leicester beat London City Royals by 32. Leicester actually have four of the is it four of the biggest five or three of the biggest four? I think it's four of the biggest five. It's not great when you're a commentator and it's 30 points
Oh,
going
I
into
thought
the
you
fourth
managed
quarter.
perfectly.
Fourth quarter was a struggle.
Yeah.
Also, the most points in a final. The previous high was 100 by Guildford. They were the only team to get to 100. And Rob Paternostro wins his sixth playoff title, which draws him level with Fab at the top, and Leicester win their seventh, which draws them level with Newcastle
Mm.
in that category as well.
If you count SLB and BBL,
If you add them all together, if you
which
if
I
you
think you
do
have
top
to be
flight, you
fair.
have to do it for at least 10, 15 years.
I think you
Uh,
do. You do.
But
And what about
and
Richmond
again,
being
you
score?
can't tell the story of that game without talking about the history of those two
Of course he
clubs.
can't. No, of
Yeah,
course he
yeah,
can't.
yeah,
And the history is, of course, what's been entirely forgotten by the stuff we were talking about before.
yeah. Exactly, exactly.
Exactly.
And
There
and
is.
to some extent was before as well. It was kind of
Yeah,
uh, not ignored, but it was not valued. The,
it
my
was
my
devalued.
yeah, my issue with the old regime was always there was an emphasis on storytelling, but it was of storytelling of uh, players, and I'm not against that. I think that's a good thing as well. But it was never a storytelling of the clubs, and of course, players come and go,
Yeah,
and particularly in this league, and particularly the sort of players that you want to talk about. The Teddy Buckets
absolutely.
and the Q Monies are the ones that you're going, well, what do they do? How's
Yeah,
their
well, yeah,
year? And
yeah.
you're
Well,
going,
the problem is me and you're cynical, so we've seen guys like that
yeah,
before.
yeah.
I had a guy called Steve.
Whereas
You
the
see, well,
story
massive.
the story to me is, well, last year was, look at this Cheshire team doing something
Exactly.
incredible and winning their, whatever it was, seventh trophy
Yeah.
final or something or other, putting it in the context of what has happened in the past for that club and
Well,
for that.
sport is context. Sport is all
Yeah,
about
yeah,
context.
yeah,
If
yeah,
Newcastle, if Newcastle United, win their first
yeah, yeah,
trophy in 70 years, it's
yeah, yeah,
massive. If they win
yeah.
three next year and four the year after, it doesn't
It's
become as
not.
important anymore. It's
Yeah,
all, that
yeah,
is the
yeah,
thing about, and to be honest, that was the fun of watching the Eagles beat the Lions last week.
yeah, yeah,
Wasn't that
yeah,
that team beat that team? It was the context of, the last 3 or 4 years as well.
yeah, yeah.
And you came
Exactly.
into it.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
is
yeah,
being the dominant club, and
yeah,
and still could have been, and so that made it, and that's not probably less so for me, but more so for the fans who kind of lived through it, if you know what
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know,
Well,
it's
there we go back to that was why the atmosphere was what the atmosphere
fair
was
was,
last
yeah,
week in Newcastle because the people in the building understood the context that they were
absolutely,
watching, and that to me is the thing that we've kind of lost a little bit, and obviously I one of my rants earlier in the season was about the losing of the history and the making of me going top flight British basketball rather than just
yeah.
saying in BBL history,
It's interesting, yeah,
because actually that is the thing that all of these clubs to a greater or lesser extent have. Obviously, we've got that sort of grey thing with Manchester, and but then Manchester's always been complex
yeah.
as a basketball city, and Surrey, sort of, but the
But
fans still
that's still
remember the
sorry clubs. They're playing
Scorchers.
in the same leisure centres. They're
Yeah,
still,
yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah,
still the
yeah,
clubs down. It's interesting you say that because the stuff that I really enjoyed doing the most was the nesting series that the Eagles did
yeah, 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 yeah,
when we were in lockdown. And
yeah,
obviously you're celebrating wins, so you like talking about things you were
yeah,
good at
yeah,
and
yeah,
wins, and you never watched Leicesters back.
yeah,
But
yeah.
nevertheless, it kind of, it was able to catch up with some of the guys who've gone on and done different things in their lives,
Mm,
and also let the fans see a bit of that and have a little bit of kind of understanding of everything. And yeah, part of that was ego, but also part of that was context.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're showing kind of these are the big games that have been played for various different reasons
Yeah,
over
yeah.
the years. And
And again, that sort of relates back to this game in the fact that you can't look at whatever Leicester have achieved without looking at it through the prism of Newcastle and what Newcastle had done to the point where that sort of elevated Leicester to get to the point where
well, yeah, well,
they were.
they basically dragged us down at the top of the ladder while we were kicking and screaming,
Mm,
basically,
yeah.
primarily because they were dogged.
Mm,
And primarily because we got slightly old, and also we got slightly old, and your dad got the arena built,
mm, mm,
at first, effectively 3 years
mm,
before the Eagles arena got built.
mm.
So all those things, but it wasn't easy, and it was a year. And we're all telling you, it was a year-on-year struggle,
Yeah.
and we probably should have probably seeded it about 2 years before we did.
Mm,
But we just had so much cussedness and doggedness that, that he was like, grab it out of our cold dead hands. But they took that challenge on,
mm.
and then the club took the challenge on to build an arena. And this is all the stuff that we forget.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah.
now just like Sheffield now building an arena.
Yeah,
One
and
thing that we
again,
forget, which
we're sort of talking about that, but the same is true in the semi-final. In that you were just talking about the context of beating London last week in the semi-final,
yeah,
and all of the history that Leicester and Sheffield have
yeah,
going back
absolutely.
25 years in big games, in finals, in semi-finals and
It's
stuff like
not
that.
just, you might think because there's only a few clubs, everyone's got that history, but they haven't. We
No,
never played Sheffield in the final.
yeah,
Right? Newcastle never played Sheffield in the final.
mm,
Probably ever. I don't think ever, but certainly not my time. Certainly not when we won anything. I don't think we've ever played Sheffield in the final. That's
mm.
nuts if you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
Newcastle and Sheffield have generally been two of the
There or
top four or
thereabouts.
five teams
Yeah,
every
yeah,
year for the
yeah,
past 2 decades. We never played them in a final. We played Leicester in every final,
yeah, yeah,
Glasgow in a few,
yeah,
but
yeah,
never Sheffield. And so it doesn't work that everybody, that there are certain things whereby. that there is that history and there is that. But the other thing I'll say is that there is also a journey for coaches,
Mm.
you
Yeah,
know, in
yeah,
the
there
league.
is. Yeah, there's an
You
arc
know,
to it.
and Rowe alluded to it, and he's very
He
good, I
did.
think, on
Yeah,
TV yesterday, alluding to it. Stuttle's kind of at the beginning of his journey.
yeah,
Um, Insofar as I remember speaking to Fab actually before Mark's first year, and Fab said to us, Dave, no one wants to sign for a first year coach.
yeah,
No one wants to sign for first. Why? Because they don't know. It's their career, and they don't know you.
yeah.
They don't know what they're going to get. You don't have any kind of thing to kind of fall down. And the first year, we know the guys that we signed were rubbish.
Mm.
And we had signed two and a half different teams,
Mm.
and it struggled. And from that, he develops and he develops. So he's now into his third year. He's won something. I mean, it took Fab 4 years to win anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're looking at even around the league, there are some good coaches around the league. Johnny's now in his first year.
Mm.
So Johnny's got to build that now in Caledonia. Lloyd's getting to finals now.
Mm.
Atiba's winning again. It really and obviously Ben won last year and had basically the best season outside of London last year and probably better than anybody could have imagined. So there is a and obviously Rob is basically currently apologies for the horrendous mafioso language. Obviously, Rod's a godfather at the
Mm.
moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because he's been there, I think, slightly longer than Atiba.
They joined
And
this started the same year.
sort of the same, yeah, okay, same.
Mm.
But has been through it so many times.
Mm.
And what happens is every year you go through it,
Mm.
you fine tune it.
Mm.
Each and every year, the timing of the season. So there's no coincidence that Leicester went all the way to the end.
Mm.
Cheesy picture or not, they went all the way to the end. Yeah, if Mikel makes a layup, it's different. They don't, but
Yeah,
they're in there battling right to the end.
yeah, yeah.
you know, and he kept them going and he kept that kind of mental unity, despite the fact that they have had substantial setbacks over the season,
Mm.
which could have broken them. But because they're young, because they didn't know better, I think, and because they had the right kind, but more importantly, because they had a coaching group that knew how to keep that thing going until the end, because year after year they've gone until the end.
Mm.
So that's one of the stories of the league as well. We don't find out enough. I mean, it's a nonsense, that from a basketball perspective, what second biggest sport in the world, third biggest sport in the world, um, that our GB head coach would go unrecognized in his home city.
Mm.
It'd be a pointless answer, wouldn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it's just nonsense. And that is a failure, that's not of the clubs. That's a failure of our governing body.
yeah,
That's a failure of National Federation.
yeah,
It's not like he's not like he's failed. He's succeeded. Yeah, no one knows who he is.
yeah,
There'll be people in Europe who know who he is more than people here.
yeah, yeah.
And and similarly with someone like Rob who's got 18 trophies in 18 years or whatever, 16 years. I mean, these people should be household names.
18 and 17.
18,
18
17, I got
trophies,
close,
17
didn't I?
years. You were
Yeah, I
close.
got close.
I suppose that sort of leans us a little bit towards what is to come. And I'll caveat with it is I think we'll be back in September doing this all over again. But we have to sort of,
Speak for yourself. My agent's on the
well,
case.
indeed, yeah.
I'm saying you
We
should have got me on the commentary on Friday. You could really sicken me. You got me on the commentary on Sunday. I could have given you the Newcastle perspective to go along with Rowe, albeit I would have probably gone for a drink halfway through the third quarter and don't drink.
The bar,
Anyway,
there was a bar right there. There was a bar
yeah,
right
there you
there.
go. Yeah, I
It's
bet
a
there was.
short.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know how to walk far. And it was Pepsi though, rather than Diet Coke. So
Yeah,
Pepsi
I'm
Max.
not sure I like
It
those
was the
chemicals. I prefer
Pepsi
my type of
something or other.
chemicals.
Yeah, yeah. But it sort of it lends us to what's going. And obviously, there was the story in the Yorkshire Post
Yeah,
on, was it Thursday or Friday? I
yeah.
can't remember which, um, where we heard from Mr. Glickman as to the plans going forward.
Late now.
Disruptive thinking was I think the phrase he used. It certainly looked like disruptive thinking to me.
They give you an Omni Shambles quote back at you. Yeah.
I described it on Twitter as it sounded like somebody asked Alexa for what are the best ways to lose the most amount of money on British basketball in the
Yeah.
quickest amount of
Yeah.
time.
And so what you meant was it's really more disrupted thinking than
Yeah,
disruptive
yeah, yeah,
thinking.
yeah, yeah,
Actually, that's very accurate. I mean, it's my summation was slightly more mundane, pie in the sky.
yeah.
Um,
For those who's not seen it, and I would recommend going and reading the piece in the Yorkshire Post. But if
yeah,
you've not seen it, in essence, the idea was an All-Star game at Christmas. 25%, maybe more, of the games being played in world-class venues, of which there's probably only about three in the country, by the way.
yeah.
In many
I'd much prefer to watch basketball in the Virgin Motors Arena than the old Tele West Arena.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Wouldn't
wouldn't count
you?
Telly West, by the way, as one of my three.
No, I'm not. I
Uh,
wouldn't either. But I'm saying
yeah,
that's an 8,000 seater. That's an
yeah,
8,000 seater
yeah, yeah,
gym.
yeah, yeah.
You know.
But in mini regional tournaments, I mean it seems a rather peculiar way to me. Uh, and I admit I'm old and I'm sort of probably stuck in my ways and all of that. But it seems a peculiar way to build a fan base in, say, Southampton, to say, yeah, by the way, a quarter of your games are going to be in London or something. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a world class venue on the south coast, and I can't
Peculiar is
instantly.
kind. It's just bonkers.
Mm,
And it's bonkers and it's fag packet stuff. And that was just the first one. Then you're talking about only having one game a week on TV. So that'd
yeah,
put us out of
yeah, yeah,
business, wouldn't it?
yeah.
Because I ain't traveling around to watch all of
No,
these games.
no, no.
One game a week on TV, which immediately reduces the exposure of the sport it just, and that will be because they won't admit it, that because of cost,
Mm,
because they haven't got a broadcast deal, because it
mm,
costs money to produce games. You do one game a week, you don't have to do the rest. It's a backward step. And then you had, well, there was a couple of other things, wasn't there? I can't remember. But in any event, the All-Star game at Christmas, yeah, let's take away the club's best,
yeah.
but best grossing games at Christmas to play a
But
game that
again, it
nobody
was that
gives a
thing
fuss
of
about.
it sort of lent itself to not really understanding the marketplace that you're going into, because you and I know full well that if you play in the Christmas period, there are more people there because our tradition, our history as a country is we go to the football on Boxing Day or we go
Also,
to
because you're
football on
fed
New
up having the
Year's Day.
kids in the house.
Yeah, yeah. So you go and do something. So you do find that people will be very keen to go and do that. So the idea that you would stop playing and then take a concept that nobody knows or understands because there's no All-Star game in any sport in this country, and then drop it, I don't know, copper box, wherever, O2, wherever you want to put it. It's sort of like that's not what we do. So you don't quite, in the same way that Magic Weekend aside, and that's one round. There's no other sport that does mini tournament regional. Magic
And Magic
Weekend's not
Weekend,
really
I
a
mean,
regional
as
tournament, but you know what I mean.
somebody with a wife who's a Castleford fan and a
Mm,
a father-in-law who's a Castleford fan, Magic Weekend works for one reason.
mm.
Because A, it's only about 150 miles from most of the rugby league teams,
Yeah,
and B, there's 135 pubs within a mile of St James's Park.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Right, that's
yeah,
it. No
yeah,
reason,
yeah, yeah.
just a reason to infiltrate the northeast economy with a few extra million, and
Mm,
for a lot of Yorkshire and Lancashire people to get pissed up,
yeah,
and have a good day out, which is fine,
yeah,
no
yeah,
problem with
yeah, yeah.
that. But no, but it's
But it might not work if you did it 6 times a year, 7 times a year, or
yeah, and it
whatever.
didn't work when they did it
25%
in
of the
Leeds or
rugby
when they
league.
did it in Liverpool because
Yeah.
there was nothing special about it.
Mm,
There was no kind of, oh, it's a day out trip, um, which is why they keep coming back up here. Um, but I mean, you're being very polite about this. I mean, the bigger question is that this document, this is the best they've come up with. That's a one sheet kind of beer mat type document with some broad ideas. Oh yeah, we're going to have 10 teams in places that have never heard of basketball, with no fan bases, no nothing. And basically, we'll just look at the map and go, boom, boom, there's an arena there, place there, arena there, whatever.
The correlation, I think, is it's aside from London, it's the 10 largest cities in the UK that don't currently have basketball teams in.
Oh, what a load of nonsense. That
I,
is,
I
yeah.
read that. I read that. I don't know that to be true, but my understanding of population is it sounds true, so therefore that would make
Well,
sense. And if I was
and
looking
here's the
for,
bigger point,
I'd
right?
want the biggest markets, wouldn't I?
Yeah, you would, but here's the bigger point, right? We are now what, three, probably 4 months, maybe even 5 months into them quote marks bidding for the license,
Mm,
right? We're at least 3 months, 3.5 months from our glorious governing body determining that they were the preferred bidders.
mm,
We are 3 months on from basically public threats being made against people who are continuing to run basketball in this country and actually do something like putting games on in
mm,
arenas.
mm,
And that's the best that they have come up with in relation to a business plan or a business kind of outline. And so the question is, who on the board at BBF saw this stuff? If they did see this stuff, who the hell considered that taking all the games off the TV would
mm,
help in growing the sport?
mm-hmm,
Who then voted it through knowing all of this? And how are those people fit for purpose?
mm,
Right? Because if I'm anywhere near that board, right, I read that, you know, pile of steaming manure,
mm,
right? Sorry, but and look at it and think, well, I don't want anything to do with this.
mm,
We're just going to put a team in Southampton in a year's time. Southampton's never had a basketball team.
mm,
There's been teams along the south. Never. If they'd gone and said Worthing or Brighton or whatever, but Southampton. Oh no, we're going to go. We're going to go and put. Yeah, it's just um, you have when you're on that board, you have a duty or fiduciary duty to the sport,
mm,
right? It isn't one man's whim, and it's not basically one man should not have the power to overrule others. We were told that this was a unanimous vote to accept this proposal. It was the only proposal they had, and so logically, to save face, they accepted.
mm,
I know when I go to court, and if a defendant doesn't turn up for his trial, it's very unlikely that a magistrate is going to find him not guilty
mm,
if he hasn't put his own side. There's nothing else to choose from. You know what I mean? And yet they have a responsibility and a requirement to do due diligence,
yeah.
and they haven't done it.
No,
Nothing has been done.
not
Nobody,
in the actual meaning of the word. You
not
can
in the word meaning of,
me and you could say, "Oh, I've done due diligence. I've asked my mate, and he
I've
said
asked
it's
your mate
good,"
or I've said him,
but
and
not
now,
in the sort of legal sense of it.
and the
My thing
person,
is, and you just sort of mentioned it there. The sole purpose of a governing body in any sport is to enhance and grow that
yeah,
sport.
yeah,
Now, obviously, they have to run national teams and junior national teams and stuff like that as well. But at its core, the most important thing that a governing body does is grow and develop the sport. And if you sit there and you said I've been nice. I'm trying to be balanced
yeah, I
about
know
it,
you
and I
are.
probably if you and I weren't recording this, I might be a bit less balanced about it.
Well, it's very
But
difficult to find anything of balance because you're on. I'm on one side of the seesaw, and Ramon Fletcher's on the other side. He's half my weight.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, or Darius
but
maybe.
but but it's that thing of the job is to grow and develop the sport. So the
Yeah,
idea that you would take the game away from 9 cities that currently have fan bases in,
yeah.
which is what's been put forward. Now they say, "Oh, we'd love the SLB teams to go in," but you're asking them to give away their business in
But
essence.
you said that now. They said that now. They
Yeah,
didn't say
well,
that
yeah,
past
they
three
didn't
months. They
say
said
that
that
before.
now, and now their backs are to the wall because they
Yeah,
realise how pie in the sky nonsense this all is, which is what we've been saying from the beginning. So now they decided to throw out an olive branch. But by the way, you can't have any control of it. But oh, we'd love you to join in. It's like,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it's that thing of then where does it? Everything dissipates out of that. So all of the fans. Niall ran a poll on Twitter. What would you do in the event that SLB became the Rebel League? Would you go and support
mm,
a GBBL team? Would you continue supporting your own team? Would you leave the sport? Whatever. It's like 90%, I think, in favor of staying with the team that they currently support because that's the whole point of being a fan, a supporter. There's a few people over the years who've jumped
that's the
ship or
nature of
followed their
fandom.
clubs, but they've done that because there was some people from Manchester who ended up being Cheshire fans because Manchester went bust,
Yeah.
and they like the sport. But there'll only be a handful of them that would ever make
And I went from
that trip.
Tyneside to Sunderland because it
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
it happened, but not very often. But
No,
the thing is, but by going back to, by seeking to go back to year zero, they immediately, this is what you talked about before, they immediately dismiss the context of everything that's gone
yeah,
before.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
They
yeah,
immediately, sports build up followings by sometimes pure longevity,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
nothing else. That's rugby league.
yeah,
That's football. It's generational. It's
yeah, yeah,
generation after
yeah, yeah,
generation after generation.
yeah.
Now, we keep wanting to jump that, hop it as quickly as we can to kind of get over that,
And
and it's not
again,
going to
I
happen.
think part of that is American thinking, in that
Yeah,
the Americans are much more transactional with their sport than
yeah,
than we are, and it is, oh, we've dropped it in Las Vegas and 10,000 people come and watch because
yeah,
they're in Las Vegas and now they have a team and they can support,
yeah,
or they're winning now, so we'll all come and support them, or something. The Americans, British people are a lot less transactional with it, and that's why the a lot of the issues with ownership in football that you're currently seeing is because it jars against, the Man United thing of people being asked to move so they can sell those tickets for more money.
yeah.
The American concept is, if you can sell it for more money, sell it for more money. That's the sort of the
You can
way.
get
It's
another
that
city to
whole,
build.
they
Yeah.
the size of the game, how big a game is, and you hear this on like sports podcasts. Oh, this is a huge game because tickets are going for $20,000 on the resale market.
Mhm.
That's not the concept that sits well with British sport. Now, the American owners within British sport, they want those seats so they can sell them for £10,000 instead of £100, sort of
Yeah.
thing. And so it's that, but that is causing a jarring, a butting up against. And if that is your start point, you're going to have difficulty because you've got to build the audience from a start point that jars against the culture of sport in that country. It's less of an issue in Man United, even though it's a massive issue, by the way. It's less of an issue because you've already got 100 and whatever years worth of fan base
Yeah.
behind, and history and support. And actually,
But
the
even
outrage
then,
is because there are people who've sat there for 30 years in that seat and they're just being kicked out without. And it's that thing.
but
It's
even then, they displaced about 10,000 of their own people who formed their own football club, didn't they, when the Glazers
Yeah,
came in?
true, true, true. Yeah,
Because this isn't the way we want it to be. And
yeah,
they've said we prefer to go and do it ourselves.
yeah.
And the point you just made, it's an entirely valid one. But what's really disconcerting about it is that at no point is it even acknowledged or considered within the nonsense that we read.
Mm,
And you get the impression that is because they are totally oblivious to it.
mm.
Because, as you say, it's how do you start? How do you make a small fortune in British basketball? You
Start
start
with
with
a
a large
large
one,
one.
and and
And
and they
the
don't even have that much money.
no, and
Desperate enough.
the thing is, the thing about it is even if you did and do, and I, I don't know how much Glickman and his entourage know about British sport. I don't know him at all. I'm aware of him from the short time he was at EuroLeague. Um, but the people who sit on the board in this country should all know about. Now, they might not, any of them have ever sold a ticket or ever
Attended the
run a
game,
professional sporting
or even
organization or
attended a
anything.
game,
Maybe, but
maybe.
but they should know, like I know, the sort of culture. I know what draws me to go and pay my money to go and watch sport, and what alienates me and alienates the people who sit around me or draws us in. We know what that is, and we've been brought up in that culture. And because, I'm been exposed. I lived in America as a child. I've got a Canadian father, an Irish mother. I see different ways of different types of
Yeah,
culture and whatever. I sort of understand the American thing and why the American thing works, but it works in their context and in their audience. And I think it's the same thing with what the NBA is trying to do in Europe. I think the NBA is coming over with an
traveling
NBA
around.
mindset, and you'll put the NBA logo on it, and it will. But that doesn't replace Partizan Belgrade, Red Star Belgrade.
No,
It doesn't replace
I think
Žalgiris or whatever.
that
You know what I mean?
yeah, I think
That's
the
the
NBA is
thing
I
that
think
brings
the
people
NBA
in.
is fully aware of that, but that's a difference. I don't think they're oblivious to that. I think that's why
No,
they're dancing
no. Which
around
is
it.
why they're trying to
They're
reel in.
dancing around it and trying to
Yeah,
find a way, but I think they're fully
yeah,
aware of the difficulties
yeah,
that they have because
yeah,
you have to remember them anything the NBA expands into is going to be on the basis of the owners. Would you
mm,
believe it? Who get the
yeah,
choice how to spend
yeah,
the money, which is
yeah, yeah,
exactly what Mr. Glickman and the BBF are saying the owners shouldn't have the opportunity to do in their own
yeah,
businesses.
yeah, yeah.
So, and the last thing the NBA can afford, of course, is a public relations nightmare of something failing because the NBA's trajectory is all about the way it's perceived,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and it has to be perceived. And if so, therefore, they're treading very, very carefully. Unfortunately, what Grant and his cohorts have done is tread the opposite of carefully.
Mm,
In fact, they've gone and they've planted hand grenades, and then they've
mm,
religiously stood on them every half an hour,
yeah.
and just blown up more and more molehills. Um, and it's a question we talked about 3 or 4 years ago, and probably never we always come back to who picks the pickers.
Mm,
Who is the person who is, we have a ridiculous 12-person board, um, in order to give every little Tom, Dick, and Harry the say, like the FA when it used to be run by, 57 county chairman and
mm,
representative for, little Snoddington's, you know,
yeah.
team, whatever. And, or, like the rotten boroughs before the Great Reform Act of 1832, when
Yeah, yeah.
you get
But
four votes in the borough, three for the
having
family, one
just
for the
talked
butler, and
about
that
the
was it.
context of our culture, that is in our culture, isn't it? That is
Well,
kind of
yeah,
our governance culture is that.
well, it is, and it is. Why is it our culture? Because it's set from the government, and
Yeah,
it's been modified in other sports.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah. It has. Yeah,
you
yeah.
go back as much as 25 years ago. Lord McLaren took over ECB when there was a bunch of um, staid suits, and they've had chief executives since who've
Mm,
basically been in charge. Football is now the Premier League is the board. It's run on the same basis as the NBA. There's 20 clubs. They get a vote.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, um, unfortunately, because basketball has been too busy suckling at the teat of the public purse for so long, we're controlled by the government.
Mm,
And unfortunately, when you're controlled by the government, the people get put into place, are therefore what on that board, maybe attending 6 meetings a year,
mm,
3 hours a meeting. It's a fourth or a fifth job, who aren't going to have the expertise or the ability to pick up a phone, or the willingness to challenge a paid chairman who's got this is the way we've got to go, folks, to say actually you're in cloud cuckoo land. So no challenge happens. So you end up in this situation whereby um, they play chicken for so long, and eventually they start backing away
mm.
because ultimately they haven't got the clubs, they haven't got the venues, they haven't got a Scooby, they haven't got,
But
this.
I mean, it's a minor point. But even the thing where it did say, I'm I'm sure I'm right. It did say world class venues. Now,
Yeah,
in my head, when I hear that out of an American voice in
yeah,
an American voice, I think of NBA level
yeah,
venues.
yeah,
So, how many NBA level venues are there in the country? O2,
yeah,
whatever the MEN is called now. I
yeah,
don't know what that's called.
yeah,
And presumably Co-op Live. I've not been there, but it's
uh,
20,000 seats apparently.
yeah,
I don't think there's another one after that, if I'm
no,
honest with you, at that level. So
mhm,
you've got three, and two of them are in the same city.
yeah, yeah. I mean, where are you going to go in Glasgow?
Mm.
Where's that venue in Scotland?
Well, I
Bray
suppose
Head?
there is the what is it? The SS. Have never again. I've never been there, but that's
Yeah,
a big place, isn't it? The
yeah.
SS SSE is it
But
or whatever it's called?
it's just the if it it's difficult, and the problem we have is that we come out from a position of substantial knowledge of everything. around the sport in this country and how it's developed and everything that's been tried and how it's worked and what the venues are and what the difficulties are. And it's how do you convince somebody? How do you convince people that that knowledge is worthwhile to
mm,
stop them walking into a pit of their own making,
mm,
and falling down the coal mine and spending a lot of people. They won't listen.
mm,
They don't listen. They've decided that, in the world of Trump, that the guy with the biggest mouth and the biggest plans, and however nonsensical they are, the bluster will win through. It's Brexit all over again. No, actually, it's even worse than Brexit because there's no suggestion that they understand what the ramifications of what they're seeking to do will be, which is basically, that basketball.
mm,
And I think and the problem is, and the other thing about it, which is Trump-esque and Brexit-esque, is the double speak.
mm,
They speak on one hand about, as you've just said there, we'd like to work with the SRB clubs. On the other hand, they've basically spent the last 3 months traducing them,
mm. Although it
challenging
was
them.
interesting, you won't have seen it because you're obviously not on Twitter.
No,
There
no.
was a congratulatory tweet out from GB Basketball at GB Basketball to I think to both teams, both Sheffield and Leicester for um, winning their respective playoffs, which I'm pretty sure is the first time it's happened this year. And Rob replied. I can't remember what he said now. It was cynical or something like that. Uh, but there was part of me thought, ooh, I wonder if that's like, I don't know. I
Is that how
tried to
it's
go
done?
glass half full, and it's sort of like,
Well, the
okay, here's our
reality,
little step back towards you. I
yeah,
don't know.
well, the
Maybe I'm
reality,
overreaching. Maybe
no,
I'm
no, no, you're not.
overreading
You're
it.
probably not, because the reality is that that press release did two things that they did. One, they produced it on the Wednesday before the cup, before the finals,
Mm,
um, in order to remain relevant and also
mm,
to kind of undermine what was coming up, to get a story in the paper which was
mm,
negative as opposed to positive. So there was, but in the meantime, throwing out an olive branch. They know, and you cannot convince me that these people do not know and have not known from the beginning. I don't think the BBF board did, but you cannot convince me that Glickman and Co. did not know that their plans are untenable without the vast majority of the current clubs, right? You cannot convince me that they thought that they could run a league and start a league from 10. I cannot believe they are that naive. I cannot believe they are that badly advised, right? In which case it's worse, because what you've had is you've had 3 months of consistent undermining, and manipulating, and basically impacting the businesses of these clubs in relation to season tickets for next year and
mm,
uncertainties and sponsors and all that stuff, knowing full well that you would need them in the end.
mm,
And you've done that in an attempt to bully, an attempt to cajole, an attempt to kind of bring them over to your side to get a critical mass. So then you can say we've got 4 or 5, so the other 3 you're going to have to come with us, and then we'll have our opportunity. That's the way it's happened.
mm,
And they've eventually, because we're now getting to push comes to shove time, they've eventually come to the view that actually this ain't going to work. They're not budging. So now it's, oh, come on, we'd like to talk to them, all this stuff.
mm,
And I'm afraid it's in bad faith from my
mm,
perspective. When somebody shows you who they are, believe it.
mm,
When somebody acts in the way that they've acted, believe it. And whether, as I say, from the GBBL, whatever they're called, I think it's entirely in bad faith. I think it's kind of the corporate American muscle. It's Harvey Specter from Suits, you name it.
mm,
It's, we can override whatever you want because we've got the money, blah, blah. We're going to come in and change things, etc. From the BBF's board, I just think they're hopeless.
mm,
I think they're utterly, utterly hopeless. Um, and decided that the only way we can make a quick buck and put our teams on the court this summer is to tax the clubs, who they should be celebrating.
mm.
They should be celebrating
And the
our
irony of it is
Newcastle's
that
170 team
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Premier League.
yeah,
That is a positive for them. You
yeah,
don't
yeah,
hear a word about it. They're not interested.
yeah.
They're interested in
Because again,
consuming what they can off the top.
it is that sort of paradox in that it isn't really that sort of thing isn't really their business because that's more about the home nation's
But the home nations have
business.
3 members of the board.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I was going to come to that, but
Yes, sorry.
it's still like the overarching banner is still about growing and promoting the sport. And
Yeah.
actually, my guesstimate is 90% of the basketball played in the Northeast goes through the Newcastle Eagles uh, uh, uh,
It used to.
foundation wide thing.
It actually used to, but what I'm going to say now is
Yeah.
because of the success of the foundation, which goes as
Mm.
far north as Morpeth, as far south as the beginning of Sunderland, we're now actually finding that there's more clubs setting up in the diaspora around those areas. So
Okay.
there's East team in East Durham, a couple of teams in Sunderland, a new company set up in North Durham. Teesside, there's always been two or three teams, and Hartlepool has now got a team with an ex-Eagles Community Foundation coach who's set up the Hartlepool. I forgot the name, might be Hawks, something like that. And so it's actually an example of it flowing outwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
13 clubs we have in our foundation. It flows outwards and
Yeah.
to the point whereby you get a really positive ecosystem because you can't run everything yourself, you
No,
know?
no,
You
exactly.
want that.
But the point is, none of that 20 odd years ago, none of that existed at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
None of
And
it,
so
and
if
it's literally grown out of that. And it's sort of actually that is the thing we should be celebrating more so in big picture real world, more so than wins and losses on a Friday night.
and it created an NBA player.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I mean, for the sake of it, which is, whether it's chance or not, if it doesn't exist, if we don't have an NBA player. But again, yeah, that should be. But in fact, you will hear nothing of that because there's no funding for that program or indeed any other programs. They're all self-funded. There's no central funding. The ACB will provide the cricket clubs with considerable amount of funding every year
Mm,
to develop their teams. In fact, they've just put in an X million in relation to the women's cricket to set up a women's professional cricket in 12 different counties, including Durham. Obviously, the FA, they have tons of money, but they are able to. The Lawn Tennis Association will put money into bursaries and scholarships for the best people, best players.
mm,
They are able to do that because they have events.
mm,
They're able to do that because they run as a business. Our lot don't run as a business. We run as a handout factory.
mm,
Give us a handout to UK sport. Give us a handout here. And what they don't do, and they've shown no inclination to do, and it's basketball, and they know Great Britain basketball, and we hoped it'd be better with Grant, and it sounded like it might be better with Grant until he went and basically sawed the legs off under it. And what they don't do is come on the back of what is being done around the country and
yeah,
support what is
yeah,
being
yeah.
done around the country, in the various different organisations. Milton Keynes got a hell of a program now.
Mm,
They only started 5 or 6 years ago.
yeah, yeah,
Guy Williams is over there coaching there. There's a few
yeah.
others, you know. And in Manchester had great programs. Leicester's had programs down in Sussex as a hotbed of basketball
Mm, mm,
down there. And obviously the London team's always extraordinarily strong. Um, but it's also separated from kind of the positive stories that are going on within it. And for some reason, they have determined over the past 20 years that whoever's been in charge has determined that the professional game is their enemy,
enemy, yeah,
when in fact it's actually the biggest thing they have.
yeah, yeah.
And all it needs is somebody with a degree of vision to see the synergy between the clubs that have managed to do things like build their own venues in
Yeah. The
Scotland
cynic in
and
me says that vision was 2006, and we missed the boat on that because I was quite positive, and I know other people weren't. At least one member of the board, in fact. The that the Olympics had the potential to be a really positive thing, but immediately, and I can't remember, it's obviously none of the current people, but immediately that board came in, they just went, "That's all crap. We're having nothing to do with it,"
yeah, and of
and
course
then
the Olympics had a performance director who was from
yeah,
athletics, wasn't he? I mean,
yeah, and
it's just
they missed the opportunity. To me, that was the opportunity for Synergy to use money that was coming in
yeah,
at the national level to
yeah,
actually build something out.
to
And actually,
inspire a
what happened
generation.
is inspiring generation. God, that makes me sick.
Mm.
The But what happened was 10 years later, when they lost all their funding, they sort of came back to, oh, this might be a good idea if we work together because they needed some help. And then it looked like, well, last summer maybe we finally will get it all together. 20 years too late, but maybe we will get it all together. Um, and then what's
and
happened has happened,
it's not
and
that
I
bad.
think we've probably talked it to death now, haven't
Yeah, I
we?
think so. I think so.
Um,
It's, um,
but if I was a season ticket holder in Newcastle or Surrey or Leicester or wherever, I wouldn't have any worries purchasing my ticket now for next
oh
season.
God, absolutely not. I mean,
Put it that way.
I've got it online. The whole GBB, I think, is a busted
Yeah,
flush.
yeah, yeah.
It's a busted flush. They're going to need they're going to need that they're starting to look for outs now that the language
Mm,
becomes a little bit more conciliatory. They're starting to look for ways out, and I don't think it's viable. I mean, we sat through Synergy, we sat through Ron Scott with two teams,
mm,
which weren't teams in leisure centres. It's just the sport has moved on far too much from then. We have self-funded clubs that are, with turnovers of, 500,000 now with venues and things like that. We've never been close to that before. And I just don't think um, that, I think they know now that this just isn't going to work, isn't going to fly. I think the SLB will be recognised for next year, whether it's
mm,
formally affiliated or not, I don't know.
mm.
Um,
In
and
some ways, that's the biggest misstep, isn't it? Because if it's not formally done, they get no money from a license, and
yeah,
you overplayed trying to get money, and you end up with nothing.
well, that's right. And um, but it all comes down to the fundamental understanding of the market you're in,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you
yeah.
cannot plop professional basketball teams in cities where there's no history of basketball and
Mm,
expect people just to show up
yeah.
to the degree that you need to do to run a business that is going to be incurring costs well over well over 500,000 a year.
Mm,
And that you can do that if you want to burn money.
mm,
And I think there's a few teams this year who have burnt some money. Um, but people, if you're going to do that, they're not going to be around for 15 years.
mm. No.
These people are in it to try and these people are in it because they see the venue. The owners are in it because they see the value of NBA franchises rising exponentially.
Mm,
Buy it for 600 million, sell it for 3 billion. That's
yeah,
why they're in it. They think they can do the same over here.
yeah,
That's why the Americans have came into football.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, football's more of a money pit.
yeah, yeah.
Basketball it doesn't even have a pit. It's
Mm,
just money. So you
mm,
literally don't even get into the pit. You set it off, you set it on fire, and you don't have to set as much of it on fire in basketball, but the victories are more fleeting because you don't get the
Champions League money.
adulation
Mm,
that you get in football.
yeah, yeah,
For if like Ryan Reynolds at Wrexham, they've got
yeah,
they
yeah.
put in they've basically picked up a distress asset at low level.
Mm,
They've very smartly marketed it. They've developed a following for it. They've tapped into the energy of the sport and the city.
mm,
But there's not. But that's football.
mm.
That's not going to happen in basketball
And
because
they came in at the lowest point
and they
you could
came in at the
virtually
lowest
come
point
in.
and
Yeah,
built it.
yeah, yeah,
They didn't come in, if he'd been told to come in and say, oh, it's going to cost you 2 million to come in and then spend another million in the first year, what do I get out of this?
yeah. Mm,
There is never a return.
mm,
Um, Never an immediate return. And I'm afraid I don't think there ever will be. I think there might be Americans who think people who don't know enough about it who are willing to spend on it as kind of vanity projects. But just like, rugby league clubs are the same, rugby union clubs are the same. Um, you want to compete, you have to spend. If you have to spend, well, you might be spending more than you've got. So
mm,
deal with the fact that deal with the fact you're going to lose money. Treat it like that. Treat it as a tax write-off. What did London Lions lose? 8 million, something like that in 3 years,
yeah,
2 years.
something like that. Yeah.
That's fine. It was 8 million of probably somebody else's money, but that's the way it's always going to be. And there's always a smart American businessman who thinks he can change that, and not one of. And if they were that smart, there's two things they would do: they'd pick up the phone to you, and they'd pick up the phone to me. And on that note,
On that note,
on that
I'm not
supercilious
answering it. I don't recognize
self-congratulatory,
the number. I'm not answering it.
took the silliest, self-congratulatory,
Yeah, yeah,
egotistical view that
yeah.
we are out of here.
Here we are.
Out of here.
So we'll be back in September, I assume. We'll have a conversation in September
Yeah, I don't
about do we want to go for
know.
this again, Dave?
Oh God,
Should
yeah.
we go for it?
It has been fun. Thank everybody. Thank you, everybody, for the
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Actually, that we should say that because I've probably had more feedback this year than we've ever had from people, and it's been universally lovely. It's
yeah,
been well received, and I know we joke about the gifts, but we're very grateful for those
we joke about them, but to
along
be
the way.
honest, I mean, they've been tailing off, so keep them coming. Yeah, no, we are of course we're grateful,
Yeah,
and obviously it's an hour and a half of everybody's time every week. I mean,
yeah,
45 minutes if you put us on double speed, which is probably sensible.
yeah, yeah,
But even so, it's time out of people's lives, and
yeah,
just to listen to two people who talking about something they enjoy talking about,
yeah,
basically.
yeah.
So we do appreciate that, and hope that it has, as ever, added something to the
We
maelstrom
don't
of
care what it is,
we
but
don't care
something.
what it is. It's something. You be hopefully we are in the positive
Yeah,
plus minuses,
yeah,
Dan.
yeah.
You
Hopefully,
know,
hopefully.
hopefully. I think we probably are.
We hope that you get the value out of the nothing that
Yeah,
it costs to listen to this.
yeah,
We aim to be value for money.
absolutely.
We
That's
give
British
nothing and we take
basketball.
nothing.
No one pays for anything. British basketball.
Yeah.
We got to be
But
infinite.
yeah, it's been a roller coaster, I think
Yeah,
is the word I used at the start, and I'll use it at the end as well because it's been one of the more interesting years,
yeah.
given everything that's gone on, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more of interest and intrigue over the next few weeks and months before it all wheels back around in
Just a few less games, huh? I think
yeah,
just a few less.
yeah,
I think we had enough. I had enough games this year.
yeah, yeah,
I'm going to look forward just to taking a week off,
yeah,
or a month off, or three
yeah.
months off, because there is a lot to watch. But we will watch them.
We will indeed. So thank you for your time, everybody, over the course of the last 9 months or whatever it is. Dave and I are going to lie down now
Yeah,
and hibernate until September.
I'm going to
Um,
Google what to do with your weekends.
the
Yes,
garden, Dave. You got to get out in the garden.
get out in the garden. Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to do stuff. I don't like that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it all.
and we will see you all next season. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.